The colonies in the 1780s were in economic chaos, an outright inflationary mess. Picture this. It's like you're trying to buy a loaf of bread and the baker's telling you, yeah, that'll be a month's wages. People were paying with paper money that had about as much value as a soggy napkin, all thanks to the infamous Continental currency, money printed by Congress in massive amounts to fund the war, which quickly became worth less than the paper it was printed on. Alright, so let's dive in. The colonies were feeling the effects of the Revolutionary War, and economically they were as strained as a pair of pants 2 sizes too small. Everyone was broke. Soldiers weren't getting paid, businesses were failing, and the only thing rising faster than prices was people's frustration. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, had been printing money to fund the war, but since it wasn't backed by anything real, like gold or silver, confidence plummeted, and so did its value. Let's rewind to before this inflation nightmare. The colonies had their issues, taxes, anyone, but the economy functioned. People traded, bought, sold, and saved in pounds and shillings, all good. But when the war kicked off, the British blockade started squeezing the colonial economy. Imported goods became as rare as a decent cup of coffee, and as if on cue, Congress decided to print its own money, the Continental dollar. Problem is, they didn't exactly handle it like responsible adults. They printed, then printed some more, then thought, hey, let's keep this printer going. By the time the ink dried on the first run, people could practically use it as wallpaper. Not worth a Continental became a popular saying, and you can guess why. So here's where things get wild. By 1779, inflation was skyrocketing. It wasn't just that things were expensive, everything was astronomically priced. It's like Congress has said, you get inflation, everybody gets inflation. The cost of basic goods soared so high that even the wealthiest merchants started sweating. You'd walk into a store and one day a pound of flour cost $1. By the next week, that same pound was $10, and the week after it was $50. It was like a bizarre game show where you had to guess how ridiculous prices would be next. People didn't just need money, they needed a mountain of it. The only people laughing were probably the British, watching from across the ocean, thinking, yep, they're totally going to implode without us. Desperate times, right? So Congress started issuing war bonds, trying to convince the public, hey, loan us your silver and we'll pay you back someday. Imagine handing your life savings to a friend who's already knee-deep in debt and hoping they'll miraculously make it rich. That's essentially what people were doing. Meanwhile, states got in on the action too. Instead of helping to manage this currency crisis, states began printing their own money, leading to a mishmash of currencies with competing values. Imagine walking into a store and having to negotiate whether your Virginia money was worth the same as Pennsylvania's. It was a free-for-all. Honestly, monopoly money might have had more credibility at this point. Now, with the currency essentially worthless, people got creative. They reverted to bartering. Hey, I'll give you 5 chickens for that shirt. Became a legitimate exchange. Hoarding became the new national pastime. If you managed to snag some flour or coffee, you held on to it like gold. Prices rose further because everyone was hoarding. Merchants started charging sky-high amounts just to keep up with the insane inflation rate. Soldiers, forget it. They were being paid in Continentals, which, let's be real, couldn't even buy them a meal. They started deserting, and morale hit rock bottom. Washington, meanwhile, was probably somewhere in his tent pulling his hair out, wondering why the Revolutionary War wasn't nearly as glamorous as the history books made it sound. Seeing all this chaos, Congress thought it could put a stop to the madness with a few price controls. They told merchants they could only charge a certain amount for goods. Nice idea, right? Wrong. Merchants took one look at those price limits and thought, nope, I'm just not gonna sell at all then. Shelves went empty, and now people couldn't even find overpriced goods to buy. Imagine Black Friday, but year-round, and for basic necessities. People weren't lining up for TVs, they were fighting over salt. The black market boomed, naturally. Smugglers became local heroes, sneaking in goods like coffee and sugar. They were probably the only people making any money, trading essentials like they were contraband. And this only fueled inflation even more. Prices in the black market soared as demand went wild. Congress's attempts to stop the bleeding just made things worse. Families were being crushed. They saved money for years, and overnight those savings turned to dust. Farmers who once felt wealthy in their trade goods suddenly found themselves poor, unable to sell their crops for anything of real value. The British didn't have to destroy the colony's morale. Inflation was doing it for them. Local economies broke down. If a farmer wanted to sell corn to buy shoes, he'd have to figure out some complex trade, like bartering 10 bushels for a cow that he'd trade for leather. The system got so convoluted that people just stopped trying to trade altogether. Eventually, some people started clamoring for hard money, coins with actual value. Robert Morris, a wealthy merchant, led the charge, pushing for a stable currency backed by gold or silver. He urged the colonies to stop printing continentals and return to real currency. But this wasn't an easy fix. Congress was still knee-deep in debt and couldn't exactly start a currency backed by wealth they didn't have. The colonies were in so much debt that the idea of a stable economy seemed like a distant fantasy. In the end, the lesson here is that you can't just print money and expect everything to work out. The Continentals taught Americans a brutal lesson about economics. Not worth a Continental became the ultimate burn, and the country vowed never to fall into such a mess again. So there you have it, a time when everyone in the colonies went from hopeful to horrified, all because of a simple equation: too much money chasing too few goods. The result was absolute chaos, and it remains one of the darkest, and let's be real, funniest examples of a government's currency experiment going very, very wrong.